and start our investment committee. Good afternoon, everyone. Lamont, can we do the roll call?
Yes. For the State Controller, Ms. Packman.
Lynn.
Here.
Frank, don't be distracting.
For the State Treasurer, Mr. Moore.
Here.
Mr. Unterman.
Here.
Ms. Higa.
Here.
Mr. Rosensteel.
Here.
For the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Ms. Zuma.
Here.
And for the Director of Finance, Ms. Ortega. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Excellent. Thanks, Lamont. We'll go ahead and take item 1. We're going to approve our committee agenda. Entertain a motion.
Motion.
Okay.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Excellent. Before we move on to item 2, we do have a couple of requests to speak, and at the pleasure of the chair of this committee, I'd like to ask that the committee allow for us to move our statements from the public to the beginning. So I know our investment committee meetings are so engaging and gripping that you'd love to sit through the next 4 hours of them, and you're welcome to do so. Bless you. But we will go ahead and move the speakers to the front so we can hear from you. And so I have several requests to speak. And I think you've been informed in the process of how we do that here at CalSTRS. So we'll start that process. I have a request to speak from 6 speakers. So we'll start with Bill Vosberg from Fossil Fuel California. Bill?
Good afternoon, and thanks for allowing me to speak today. We've come many times in the past to talk about the need for divestment, and frequently after we speak, somebody on staff usually says something to the words of, well, we know that we're going to need oil in the economy for a long time. And I keep thinking about that. I'm thinking, that could come from a Chevron press release or from an Exxon committee release, or maybe from one of the think tanks that are sponsored by the infamous Koch brothers. This is business as usual thinking, and I don't think CalSTRS needs to do that. And of course, business as usual thinking leads to climate catastrophe. When we read the Mercer report, we see that business as usual leads to a 5 or 6 degrees Celsius global warming with its attendant global and financial destruction. When we saw the Sirius interview on tape with Mr. Enos, David Blood, and Bill McKibben, Bill McKibben noted that we don't have the luxury of time. He said he had been writing about this, warnings from the climate scientists, for 15 or 20 years. He said we don't have time we don't have a luxury of time. And Bill McKibben says that the best climate scientists now say that we will reach 2 degrees Celsius by about 2028, by some estimates, which is 12 years from now. We don't have time for normal business-as-usual practices. And instead, we should be looking forward. Instead of business as usual, we should be thinking forward. For example, listening to speakers like Beavis Longstreth and Al Gore, who spoke here, and then financial leaders like HSBC, World Bank, Citibank, Deutsche Bank, and so on, who have been warning of this carbon bubble. We should be aware of the crashes. For example, I'm retired, I'm old enough to remember the Essen loan crash in 1987, the dot-com bubble burst of 2000, and then, of course, the housing crash of 2008. These crashes come suddenly and precipitously without warning to get off the bus. Our elevator is at the top of the stairs. When it starts to fall, when the carbon bubble happens, we'll be at the bottom. We would like to have us with our investments at the top of where we are now. We should look at the $20 trillion in stranded assets that oil companies are going to lose if we keep business as usual. We should listen to the most recent report from the Financial Times, the stockbroker's Bible, it said, which says that, quote, the oil industry should accept its imminent decline. CalSTRS, we should be looking forward and hasten the transition to renewables. We should get away from fossil funds, and divestment is one step in that transition to save our portfolio, to save the planet. We can't afford business as usual. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vosberg. Appreciate that. Whoa, we got a new A new audio element. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Vosberg. Ms. Sao Brown? I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Welcome.
Thank you. Those of us from Fossil Free California who are demonstrating today represent a growing public commitment to divest CalSTRS from all fossil fuels. Since our last meeting in April, much has happened on the climate and fossil fuel fronts. Renewable energy prices tumbled worldwide. Norway has reached a deal to ban sales of all gas-powered cars by 2025. Germany and Portugal were able to completely power their countries on subsequent days using 100% renewable energy alone. There are 8 million jobs worldwide in renewable energy. The Financial Times said fossil fuel producers face a future of slow and steady decline. The oil and gas industry is under increasing risk of stranded assets. A critical mass of governments stayed broadly on course for the current and future action that Paris Agreement requires of them. Washington, D.C. divests from all fossil fuels. Frighteningly, on the climate front, we witnessed unprecedented monthly record-breaking global temperatures, wildfires, floods, and die-offs of coral reefs, including the Great Barrier Reef, and in May 2016 shattered records for lowest extent of Arctic sea ice extent. These are harsh reminders that civilization is running a sprint against time. Yet CalSTRS, disappointingly, seems to be content to remain on the warm-up phase of stretching exercises. 3 years ago, in that 2013 series interview with David Bled and Bill McKibben, Jack Ennis advocated, as he does now, shareholder engagement as opposed to divestment to influence fossil fuel companies. How significantly effective has engagement been in changing fossil fuel industry business models over the last 3 years? Not at all. Once again, last month, as they have done since 1997, the oil giants defeated all shareholder resolutions that required addressing climate change risk. As Bill McKibben said, as was said earlier, we no longer have the luxury of time. UN climate leader Christiana Figueres concurs about the pace necessary to prevent economic meltdown. Quote, successful implementation of the Paris Agreement would depend on the speed with which we can shift capital to clean technologies and resilient infrastructures. This must happen in the next 5 years. CalSTRS, you have 5 years, not to begin your divestment process, but to complete it. Former SEC Commissioner Bevis Longstreth said, quote, engagement gives the fossil fuel giants the protective cover they need to stretch out the transition process to renewables for as long as they can. It legitimizes talk over action. Further, he said, at some point down the road, towards the red light of 2 degrees centigrade, however, it is entirely plausible, even predictable, that continuing to hold equities in fossil fuel companies will be ruled negligence. CalSTRS Investment Committee, your members are waiting for your leadership. Divest now. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Susan Sarnoff.
Hello. Sorry, I'm going to have to do this off my iPhone. That's where I have my speech. Dear committee members, thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Susan Sarnoff. I'm a member of the Chico chapter of 350.org, and I am a retired teacher and member of the CalSTRS retirement system. As a teacher of young children, except for 1 year, my entire teaching career, I spent working with kindergartners. As a teacher of young children, I was continually needing to remind my students when it was appropriate for them to make choices and when it was up to the adults, the teachers in the room, to make decisions to keep children healthy and safe. I took that responsibility very seriously, and they knew and respected me for it. They knew I was there to protect them from any possible harm or danger. Sorry, I'm very emotional. As a parent, I told my son the same thing when he was growing up. As his mom, that was my job, to protect him and keep him safe. And now I say it to my 2 grandchildren. And I get a lot of flack for that when they don't like some of the decisions I make. The scientific consensus on climate change is overwhelming, concluding that we need to leave fossil fuels in the ground in order to avert a massive climate disaster in the future. So I ask, will we be the adults in the room? Will we be the protective parents and grandparents? As an organization representing the teaching profession, I believe it would be unconscionable for the leadership of STIRS to deny our responsibility to these children and their futures, to deny our responsibility to be the adults in the room. And as protectors of the innocent, we must take a stand to divest from fossil fuels. It is already late in the game. Increasing numbers of people around the world and here in our own country are suffering from the serious environmental and political and economic effects of global warming. I'm sure many of those have already been mentioned. If not now, when? If not us, who? I call on the committee members to take a stand on this. We are creating the future of our children today. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Sarnoff. Can I just, I know we have 3 speakers from a different organization about a different issue, but I just wanted to ask Chris, just, as we've had stakeholders and different organizations come, we've wanted to make sure we sort of make sure that there's a loop in process when people bring concerns, that we're listening to those concerns, and then that there's some way that we're kind of coming back and communicating what we're doing. And I just wanted to make sure, in the case of 350.org, we have a long-standing relationship with this organization. I just want to make sure for the investment committee and for the public, how are we communicating what we're doing on this front around fossil fuels? And so maybe you can you briefly?
So Geraldine Jimenez, who's our stakeholder engagement person in the investment office, coordinates very closely with public affairs, the way I describe it. Stephanie Leedsma now and Gretchen's position to coordinate with 350.org and with Fossil Free California, so they're aware of what we're doing. It might not have been highlighted enough, but we had a subcommittee of the investment committee that met 4 times this year, principally around this issue of not just divestment, but exposure to fossil fuel companies and exposure to people who burn fossil fuels, so the emissions, because that's what is causing the problem. And the committee, if Harry or Tom want to mention, because they led the subcommittee has developed a recommendation and is coming back to the board at the July meeting with a investment recommendation surrounding this topic. So I don't want to pre-release that because we're hoping to, the investment committee has to take action on that. But the committee came up with a formal recommendation and is providing it to the investment committee around emissions, low emissions, and then fossil reserves.
I think Tom wants to chime in.
Yeah, let me just clarify what the committee did, because Chris we are worried about pre-announcing something. The committee invited the staff to make a recommendation to us. And so we're awaiting the staff's recommendation, which we expect in, I guess, July.
Yes.
And that's a subcommittee of the investment committee.
Right.
So I guess I appreciate Chris and Tom your comments, and I just want to recognize that we hear you, we listen to you, we're appreciative of you coming, and so we just wanted to let you know that this doesn't fall on deaf ears. That we really appreciate you being present and thank you for your service. Kindergarten that's a lot of work for a lot of years. That's a lot of knee bends. So thank you for being here. Appreciate it. All right, we're going to move on to Unite Here. I've got a couple speakers. Alyssa? Haven't seen.
Passing out information.
Okay, great. Thank you. Alyssa Giacchino from Unite Here. Alyssa, do you want me to just, are you going to go
We'll go in.
Do you want me to introduce
order we're
everybody
standing
together?
right now.
She numbered them.
Do you want me to introduce everyone together, or are you gonna stop? Or I don't know. Go ahead. So Alyssa Giancino, Unite Here, and then also we have Pastor. I cannot read this.
Jacobs.
Pastor Jacobs from True Love Baptist Church, and then Randy Emmett says culinary. So, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam
Sure.
Chair and Investment Committee. Alyssa Giacchino with Unite Here. I'm here to talk about the Palms Casino in Las Vegas, which is owned by TPG, one of CalSTR's largest private equity partners. In a moment, you will hear from Randy and Pastor Jacobs of Las Vegas. Over the past year, Palms workers have been seeking a fair process to choose whether to unionize. A few weeks ago, it was announced that the Palms is set to be sold. The Las Vegas Review-Journal reported, quote, "There was no indication whether Palms employees would have to reapply for jobs when the transaction closes," unquote. We urge TPG to resolve the labor dispute before the ownership change. Workers deserve labor peace and a binding commitment that they will not lose their jobs. In fact, labor peace is the standard in Las Vegas, where dozens of casinos have agreed to a fair process for tens of thousands of workers. Worker retention is also the standard in ownership transitions. For example, Blackstone retained all workers without making them reapply when it took over the Cosmopolitan in 2014. In the context of the labor dispute, we question why TPG and its partner in the asset, Leonard Green, are selling the Palms now. Could they have gotten a better price and a higher return on the investment by holding on to the Palms? The announced $312.5 million sale price of the Palms implies a value to EBITDA multiple of 8.9. By comparison, weeks earlier, the Aliante Casino announced its sale with a 9.5 multiple. Moreover, given that TPG and Leonard Green acquired the Palms distressed debt at a discount, we estimate only a 12.4% return after 5 years, if we assume they acquired the debt on average for 60 cents on the dollar, which would be an annualized 2.37% return on the investment. In comparison, over the past 5 years, as the committee is well aware, the S&P index rose 59%. We have shared some materials with you that illustrate some of the points that we are making. What we request is that CalSTRS urge TPG to commit to labor peace and worker retention at the Palms. Thank you.
Thanks, Alyssa. Pastor?
Good afternoon. My name is Pastor Willie Jacobs Jr., and I lead the True Love Missionary Baptist Church in Las Vegas, a resident for 55 years, married for 54 years. I'm here today with Randy from the Palms because I share the workers concerning about the casino sale. Our faith tradition calls for the fair and just treatment of those who labor. Workers are not just workers, they are parishioners, neighbors, friends, children, parents, and spouses seeking to provide for themselves, their families, and their communities. As religious leaders, we are called to love our neighbors and seek justice for one another. I believe that private equity owners of the Palms have a responsibility to the workers at the companies they own and to the community they invest in. Yet I understand the Palms have faced charges of workers' intimidation, threats, coercion. This cannot be tolerated. Now, TPG intend to sell the Palms. TPG should guarantee the workers' job will be protected and should act decisively to ensure a fair process. There is a long tradition in the vast majority of strips and downtown casinos that when a new owner takes over a casino or a third-party operator is brought in, the workers are not displaced and the quality of their jobs is not degraded. This ensures stability for workers, their families, and our community. It also ensures workers have a stable, committed workforce to grow their business. I urge you as investors of the California Teachers Pension to call upon TPG to ensure labor peace and workers' retention for employees of the Palms. Thank you.
Thanks, Pastor.
Good afternoon. I am Randy Emmett. I'm a cocktail server at the Palms Casino. I've worked at the Palms for 11 years. I'm here on behalf of myself and more than 800 coworkers and their families. We have been seeking a fair process for a year, but instead, Palms management has faced accusations of worker intimidation. The National Labor Relations Board issued complaint last October over allegations including unlawful surveillance, threats, and coercion. The Palms settled that complaint in December, but within weeks, workers filed additional charges of threats and surveillance, which were settled with the National Labor Board in April. But the Palms still hasn't agreed to labor peace. We work hard every day. We are dedicated to our customers. We have worked to make the Palms successful and want a commitment that we will keep our jobs, seniority, and benefits through the change in owners. In other words, we are simply asking for TPG to uphold the standards set by the vast majority of Las Vegas casinos on the Strip and downtown, a fair process to choose whether to unionize and commitment to worker retention. I hope that CalSTRS will tell TPG we want our right to a fair process and our jobs protected. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for taking the time and effort to come and speak to us today. I appreciate it. So, Chris, it sounds like the ask is for us to be communicating with TPG, encouraging worker peace and retention.
Yeah, if you want, you can certainly direct me to write a letter to TPG and have Margot reach out to them and talk to them about the views expressed and our concern about, I think the phrase from the pastor of worker peace is probably the best way to describe it, is the smooth transition and the sale of the property.
Yeah. Hang on one minute. Okay.
I'd like to direct our CIO, Ms. Nailman, to write a letter on our behalf to TPG, encouraging them in the sale of this property to retain the current employees, consistent with, if in fact fact-checking is accurate, to a similar sale of a different hotel from another management company. Blackstone was referenced. Maintain those employees in a similar transaction. I just think it makes good business sense in order for you to maintain stability of the workforce, let alone the moral imperative that you keep people employed that have been good employees for a long period of time. Whether you agree with what they want to do in terms of organizing is a different issue. But from a business perspective, continuity of employees is important, and I would ask that Ms. Nailman write that letter on our behalf.
Second. Okay. Any conversation? Do we have to vote on that?
Usually
Can we just direct you?
A direction
Okay.
from the chair, direction to staff.
Yep. So I would direct staff to write the
We'll take care
letter.
of it.
Thank you, Chris. And thanks for the public speakers today. Appreciate you coming. Okay. We are going to move on to item 2, which is the approval of the minutes from our April 8th Investment Committee meeting. I entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Excellent. Thanks. So item 3 is our investment beliefs project. I'm sorry. I apologize. My bad. Jack is going to interject for one moment, an important moment.
Thank you,
go ahead,
Chair.
Jack.
Oh my God, it's going to become one of the stations.
Well, I did want to take just a moment because we need to say goodbye to someone on staff that's worked with us for 5 years, and
Where's
that's
the
Gretchen
tissue?
Ziegler.
Tissue
Gretchen's
out
right
there.
here in the audience. Stand up, Gretchen. And I wanted to particularly call her out today because not only has she worked personally with many of you on the board, helping with message points, blogs,
Made us look
columns,
good. Sound
and
good.
she works in a field where you get the request and you have to do it in 24 hours often because something's happening and you've got to produce communication points. But what is so special about Gretchen's contribution here, we really hired her to work specifically on one endeavor, and that's the funding strategy. That was the objective entirely. Those of you that have been with us a long time know we labored for years having all the right facts and figures in our hands, telling them at the Capitol for years, but having difficulty moving the ball forward, both with our stakeholder organizations and with the influencers at the Capitol. And what we recognized is this needed a full court communications strategy. And that doesn't mean a spin strategy. That means figuring out how do you tell something about a long-term liability to an environment that focuses on short-term problems. And it is that friction point that is so difficult to cross in the public sector and communicate at the Capitol. And Gretchen has that special quality about her, not only that she can talk well and speak well and articulate well, but she listens well. And it's that piece of it that we often actually don't see in often public relations professionals, because it isn't just about the spin. It's listening to why is our message not resonating? How come we're not getting traction with our fellow stakeholders or with the Capitol, or what's going on there? And I think particularly Gretchen has a very authentic spirit around what she does for our work, and recognizes that you've got to get the input there in the listening part before we're going to start reframing our arguments and making sure that we can be effective. So it was a natural that when we finished in 2014 with the funding strategy, that she came to us with this proposal of saying that we could do a lot better job here on our stakeholder relations. And it was really Gretchen that brought the proposal forward. It wasn't something like, will you do this? She framed it, thought about it, strategized it, and has brought this to full blossom in the organization. So you often don't hear all the parts of that have happened these last years, but she really bears full responsibility for pulling those pieces together, and we're going to miss her a lot. She won't be far. She will be over at that other pension system. But I do want to thank her from my heart and the organization for a lot of work she's done here so effectively.
I do have to just chime in and say, I think Gretchen, I think you started when I was not yet on the board, right? I think right when I was running to be on the board my first term. And I just have to say, I echo Jack's comments. You know, we get a lot of talk, and it's really challenging. I think as a board, we try and communicate authentically and just keep it real. I think we've demonstrated that. But I think, you know, one of the things I love being on this board is just the quality of staff that we get to work with. Our staff are amazing, and I think, Gretchen, your skill set is it's, you know, I guess they call them soft skills. There's things that you just don't have on a resume that you just get when you encounter people and watch them kind of work. And so I am bummed that you're leaving us, but I also, you know, as usual, we work in the people business, and so it's great to see people do what they need to do for their lives and for their personal life and their professional life. And so we wish you well, but we really do appreciate the work that you've done, because I often feel like a lot of our issues come down to how we communicate, and do we communicate that effectively and in a real authentic way, and not just a PR, you know, like you said, the spin. So I appreciate your help in helping us do that. I know from many board members, you've helped us write stuff when we have to go speak somewhere, and usually on the fly. I'm usually emailing you 12 hours before. I have this thing tomorrow. Can you help me? So I really appreciate just the spirit of just always trying to make CalSTRS look good, and making sure that our message is clear and concise. And we're going to miss you, but I'm glad you're not going to be far away. So thanks again, Gretchen. Appreciate it. Aloha, as we say. All right.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Okay, thank you, Jack. All right, so we are going to jump into investment beliefs. We are in step 2. So we've got Chris Ailman, our CIO. We've got Alan Emkin from PCA. Just as a reminder, this is kind of a process that we began back in, we began it before April, but officially started in April. And this is a kind of step 2, phase 2 of a process that will continue to unfold throughout July, September, depending on how long it takes us. But again, the idea is just to really, you know, an exercise for the board to sort of, you know, get on the same page in terms of our investment beliefs, our staff get on the same page, and have an important conversation about how we view how we invest here at CalSTRS. So
We're going to get it wrapped up today, I thought.
okay, perfect, awesome, approved.
In case they forgot who I was. So hey, I think like we said, Alan and I want to do this together up here in the front. I want to refresh really quick some of the stuff you didn't vote, but you had general agreement at the last meeting about, and our hope is that we can get some sort of general agreements along the way so we can keep building this document. you'll still ultimately, somewhere in the fall, have a chance to have a first reading of the formal investment beliefs document, and then if you want a second reading. So don't feel like you're totally cemented in. I often say you're carving in soft soap at this point. So you're kind of framing what you want to do, but it's not, the wording still can be wordsmith. So we generally talked about this kind of a 6-topic quadrant idea from the research of what other funds had done. Paul brought up a great point that when we got into 2/3, 1/3, you're basically talking 8 of you approve something or more, and if it's only about 7 of you like it, then we probably should drop that or revisit that we got to cut that off and think of, we're looking for high consensus. If you remember in April, there was some discussion with legal counsel about where should the constitutional mandates for you go. Should they be a belief or should they be something else? I want to really credit Brian and Reed Smith because they jumped out and said, hey, let's create a legal framework. So what you have before you on INV 14 is what they have drafted up as first in our beliefs document, we'd state, which I like. That gives it the boundary for the public. Here's the legal framework our beliefs have to be within. And then you jump into the preamble, and then you start getting into the beliefs. So that's kind of our setup. And what we wanted to ask you right away is, what's your feedback? It's the first time you've seen the formal legal framework. And we reduced, PCA had written the investment belief preamble. We kind of condensed that because we pulled stuff out of the legal framework. Do you like that idea? How do you feel about that wording?
Tom.
So I think this works well. I was very impressed by the whole document. I think it's drawing on things that we can reach consensus on pretty quickly. I had one concern about the legal framework, and I don't know whether it's because we're just pulling the exact language of statutes out or whatever, but in particular, it could create the impression that we are actually executing a number of the decisions or policies that are that we adopt, as opposed to being a board overseeing activity, applying kind of a prudent man rule to should we a reasonable standard as to when we should interject. Particularly, if you look at the second paragraph, the board shall have sole and exclusive responsibility to administer the system in a manner that will assure. Well, we don't really administer the system. We oversee the administration of the system, or some language like that. You could get something of that inference in the paragraph before. So I think we should make it clear, and maybe it's it's teasing out one of the beliefs that I think we have, that our role is in the investment world is to oversee the administration of the investment program, not to be ultimate decision makers in terms of affecting transactions and retaining, in particular, specific managers.
If I can, Tom's a lawyer. Can
Sure.
I duck out of the way and pass that to the lawyers?
Yeah, do you want to jump in before Brian?
And we're going back.
And
there they are. I pull up a chair.
now?
Come on, Harvey.
And if you want to make a phone
Harvey
call,
Newman, let's hear it for him, everybody.
I'm gonna have Mr. Keeley jump in really quick, and then we'll hear from legal.
Thanks, Ms. Hedrick.
Board members trump legal, everything.
Thank you very much,
You
Ms.
were
Hedrick.
playing first and third base coaches on that one, and they want me to slide.
Hold
So
on,
Harry,
Har-
go ahead.
Hold on. Thank you, Ms. Hendricks.
So-
I fully support Mr. Unterman's suggestion and recommendation. The prudent man rule, or whatever the appropriate language is. I would feel most comfortable if it was explicitly stated that we're in a delegated authority governance model, something to that effect. And I'll leave
So
the
this language was lifted directly out of the Constitution of the state, so without any marginal gloss or editorial changes. And the prudent man rule or prudent expert rule that you talk about, and we'll talk about that a little bit tomorrow too, really allows for the delegation, but ultimately the buck stops here. I mean, it's the board's responsibility, and the board is charged with the administration of the system. You do that through a prudent delegation to staff and to your consultants and to your managers. And so this is really just the statement that appears in the Constitution that puts the responsibility squarely on this board.
So maybe the answer is that it has pulled out one of the other basic tenets that we have, that we think will get the best results by appropriately delegating authority.
Absolutely, and that is a prudent exercise of your discretion.
So we can add that. That's fine.
Now,
Are you
can I
suggesting-
ask, would that be a belief, or would
you
you like
adding
that
that?
up in the legal framework?
Well, I think it's a belief, because we could take the other approach that we want to oversee every trade.
Yeah.
You'd love that, Chris.
Yeah,
Well, that certainly could be included in the preamble. I don't think I'd clutter it into the beliefs unless you believe it's prudent to properly delegate that. But I think in the preamble would be a place to
either way,
reside
but I mean,
that.
that is our operating philosophy.
Absolutely.
And I think that's important to say.
Alan, you want to go ahead?
I agree with Harvey. Thank you, Chris. I agree with Harvey. I think it should be upfront, and it's almost as though the term administration needs to be a defined term. And I would encourage something along those lines so that administration means the delegation where appropriate. But I defer to council.
Yeah, okay.
So we're recommending that
I'll have a glossary attached
Having-
at the end.
I'm sure whatever you come back with.
Yeah, let us try editing the preamble. I think that's what I'm hearing, because we could go with a glossary, but I have to tell you, not to steal communications thunder, we have glossaries in almost all our policies. What they're actually already, what's really cool, starting to do is to videotape a glossary, where they videotape investment people and outsiders describing terms, so that we'd have a permanent one out there for, and every policy could just hyperlink to that video guide, so you could then look up, what does this mean? We'll have to deal with the fact that the context could be different in different things, but it makes it a little more interactive, so that you're not just looking at a glossary every time.
they'll give us examples of usage.
I will give you a link. So far, they've gotten to alpha and beta. And they're working down the alphabet. Yeah.
Okay.
But I'll say, I think it was alpha has already had 1,200 hits. So we have somebody that's a star. Yeah.
I love that.
All right, give me the sign to slide back in my seat.
Any other input on this section?
And then, so any comments on the preamble? We'll try and add something into the preamble that deals with delegation and administration.
I don't see anyone else.
Down. So the first one is that question of long-term horizon and diversification. The one that PCA had proposed is diversification improves the risk-adjusted profile of an investment portfolio. We've also had a team within the investment staff made up of, led by John Perez as a portfolio manager, who has been working on this simultaneously. And they've been coming up with a couple of other options just to give you multiple choices. So here were the two other options that they came up with. One's from another fund. But, you know, how do you feel about that first belief? Alan, do you want to comment about what you guys wrote? It was profound and definitive and breathtaking.
Madam Chair, it's a question of how much time. The concepts, the three of them are really, in many ways, identical.
Yeah.
We're very happy with our language. We are less concerned about the specific language than the concept.
Got it.
And
Then we'll go, so I'll just go unless
Yeah,
people
so
have
I
problems
would-
with the
I would say,
concepts.
Yeah, there's no comments from the
The-
board. I
the
would say
second
that's a pretty
concept
low-hanging fruit, diversification.
And it gets it, the second concept touches a little bit on the whole issue of active passive, which we know is a hot topic. But it has to do with the fact that the efficiency of markets. And I think we all recognize the U.S. is a highly efficient market, but even in a market like the USA, it tends to get less efficient when you get into small stocks that don't trade as often. There are things called the pink sheets, which have penny stocks that almost hardly ever trade. Most people view microcap and pink sheets as being, fairly inefficient because there's not good information flow. Obviously, around the world, Japan, UK, Russia, Germany are very efficient, but then you've got India, parts of China with its split class of shares. I bring up India as an inefficient market because India has very rigid rules about who's allowed to trade in their market. In fact, we've been fighting with them because they want all of our passport numbers, and we've said, no, we're not going to provide that. I know, that's how detailed they want to get. So that's belief number 2.
Chris, I've got a line of folks with some questions.
Oh,
so
good.
So let's hang out there. Tom?
Well, you touched on one of my points, which is this belief says global investment markets are largely, but not completely efficient. And I think we want to be more restrictive because I don't think you would say that about that. And I think we're talking principally about equity markets, probably more so than some of the areas of fixed income and private equity that we're talking about. In fact, the whole idea of private equity and some of the distressed investing is there are inefficiencies we're trying to take advantage of. So we ought to say that as part of our diversification program. So that was one, and it bleeds into the other comment down below about we believe in the efficient market theory. We do that when we identify a market as efficient. So I think you have to kind of pull those comments together. And then we also use the efficient market theory as a benchmark to say certain of these sectors are not efficient, and there's a premium for to be earned by a different investment style.
Okay, Alan?
There are 4 or 5 of the beliefs that I believe need to be fully debated and vetted with a real discussion of the merits and variety of different issues. This would be one of them. I think it needs to be expanded, but I think there needs to be some rigorous discussion about which markets are and which are not, and we can, at that point, find a consensus on the board on where their belief is. And I'm not sure, in deference to Mr. Unterman, that I believe that the fixed income markets are inefficient. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. And so I would like to have...
Certain of them are and certain of them aren't. I think that's my point. And I don't think it's necessary that we get to a level of identifying our belief as to which markets are efficient or not. At this point, I think that's something that we as a board would be guided by staff and our advisors on. But we do believe that certain markets are efficient, and in those markets, given the efficient market theory, we believe in a passive investment style. And I'm not sure that you can go much further than that. I mean, we could start talking about distressed debt, or we could start talking about, I don't know, certain elements of commodities trading, but I mean, I don't think we want this project to get to that level. I mean, I'd like commentary from others, but...
I've got a list of folks in line to speak on this, and again, I really appreciate the comments, and I know in talking to Mr. Emgen and talking to Chris that, you know, this is what we want to do, is raise some of the issues we have with some of these beliefs, and then we're going to have a deeper dive in the next phase. So, Dana.
I'm not really sure how to couch all my questions, so please bear with me, both of you. It seems to me that that there would be an order to these beliefs. That we would start out with a big idea and taper down into further beliefs, maybe underneath that. Not necessarily to have a belief and then sub-beliefs underneath it, but something along the lines of that we think we can create a portfolio that meets the risks and required returns of our liabilities as a big idea, and then put diversification underneath that. For me, the second, on the slide, we only have the alternative, but there was another alternative that said strong diversified investment management strategies and policies improve the risk-adjusted rate of returns of a portfolio. But that sentence seemed to go with what we have listed as belief number 1 more than it did for me for number 2. And so if we're talking about being able to create a portfolio that's going to meet the risks and required returns of our liabilities, diversification is one of those things, and that belief would come after that. So that's an idea that I had and a question that I'm putting forward. Should there be an order to it? And then that said, if our audience is just us, then we can use terminology risk adjusted, efficient, that the markets are largely but not completely efficient. But if we're writing these for another audience, then I think we need to couch it in terms that are very plain language. They're free of jargon. I have maybe, could be questionable, a decent idea of what efficient markets and inefficient markets do and what we can gain by playing in both or in multiple markets. But I'm not so sure that our general members would understand that.
Yeah.
So, and the same with risk-adjusted rate of return. I think things like diverse asset allocation, yes, that's pretty plain language. So as we develop these and we start to drill down on them, if we could do that, I think that would help us. And I know that our goal is to try to have something that's short, not necessarily short, but concise, pithy, but sometimes these ideas take more than maybe 1 or 2 sentences to fully flesh out what it is we mean. So let's not hesitate to be descriptive within that plain language and allow us the freedom to put several ideas, if that's what it's going to take to explain what it is we mean by our belief.
We're trying to be pithy.
Yeah.
I was trying to stay away from the whole pithy thing.
That's our middle name.
Can I just interject though? And I know as we've been developing this conversation around investment beliefs, I will just say, and again, it's a dynamic process, but I think when we originally spoke and talked about this exercise, I think the idea was to try and keep it, simple and to a manageable amount of beliefs, and to stay away from sub-beliefs and lots of different, because we've seen other places where that's happened, and then it just kind of ends up becoming convoluted. So I appreciate Ms. Dillon's comments. I think it seems like when we end up with the language on however many beliefs we have, to have those, in easy to understand terms and simple. But I think the exercise is I think we are writing it for the public in general, but really it's an exercise, I think, for the board and for our staff and our consultants to kind of say, hey, we all kind of agree on these basic principles. And certainly we want the public to see that and understand that. But I think really the exercise is for, if I'm understanding it right in my own mind, for us as a board, for our staff, our consultants to sort of have an agreement. We have disagreements on a lot of things, but what are the areas that we can kind of agree on and investment beliefs and have some sense of this is kind of who we are as investors. And we do want the public to understand what those are. But it's a challenge. We've got to figure out how to do that in a way. We're not going to do it perfectly, and it's not going to, fit on a business card. But I think we do want to keep it as simple as possible. All right, Paul.
So, sort of following up on some of the things Tom said, which I largely agree with. Yes, there are efficient markets and there are markets that are not efficient. And we can debate which ones are. I may be more with Alan on fixed income, depending on what fixed income markets we're talking about. But I think there are two descriptions up here of how we might talk about this belief, but there was a third in our materials which I actually thought was the best of them, because I don't really agree with the second one here. I don't think that through the use of I don't think that we can create an efficient portfolio that meets the risks and required returns of our liabilities. I don't think that there's anything that says we know for sure how to get 7.5% from here to eternity. You know, the market may enable us to do that, or the market may not enable us to do that. I think what we know, or what we have a belief in, is that through a diversified portfolio using efficient market theory, inefficient markets, that we can improve the risk return balance to the best of our ability. That doesn't necessarily mean that we can create an efficient portfolio. Right now, with the asset allocation we have, we think we can. But I actually like the third alternative, which is to say that strong diversified investment management strategies and policies improve the risk-adjusted rate of returns of a portfolio. And what we might do is, consistent with what Tom pointed out, is to say, is to add inefficient markets can improve. But just my thoughts about it.
I have no issue with the language. I just wouldn't put it here because I think they're two different concepts. I think the diversification and risk-adjusted return is one concept. Right. Efficiency is a different concept.
That is true. That is true.
And and why I think it's important is at some point we're going to be using this belief to make policy decisions on the structure of portfolios. And so it needs to be explicit. If we believe that some markets are in fact efficient, that active management doesn't add value, that needs to be a statement which is then reflected in the construction of the portfolio.
I agree with you.
Harry.
So on the point of markets being efficient, from my perspective, I think of it as in two ways. One, it goes back to Mr. Unterman's point about asset classes. Some asset classes are more efficient than others, and I think that the data will prove that out, because I think at some point it would be helpful to support what our beliefs are with what the data tells us, right? I believe the Mets are going to win the World Series this year. But you know what? History tells me that probably not. So, I would love to have... So I think asset classes distinction here is important in terms of efficiencies for us to talk that through. Then I think also regions, markets that from my very simple knowledge of markets, those markets that are more mature are more likely to be efficient than markets that are less mature. I don't know that to be factual, but I would like to see evidence that shows that to be the case, because I think it goes to what Mr. Emken then spoke about, because that essentially will be driving decisions that we make. So regional, efficient, what do we mean by efficient markets? By region, and as the world becomes more globalized, and we've made a decision with June Kim and what she's been doing for us, that's significant. Secondly would be by asset class, some conversation around efficient, where do we see more efficiency, lower levels of efficiency across asset classes, because essentially that should be driving policies that will deploy the fund's capital. And essentially, this has to be backed up by research. I mean, if we have been actively managing some of the public equity portfolio, which we have been doing, I think we should be able to look at how that has performed net of fees over time as to whether or not that has been the appropriate policy decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sure.
It's important to remember the investment beliefs are supposed to be simple and direct and clear. They're not an implementation strategy. It's a belief. It's a macro concept. When you review fixed income policy, at that point, we dig deep into fixed income and say what part of the fixed income markets are efficient and which aren't. And the same would be true in every other asset class. At this point, the concept, at least from PCA's perspective, is just to get on to the belief statement that there are markets that are efficient, and by definition, there are markets that are inefficient. And when we go through each asset class, we'll address that in detail with all the analysis that you would request, but not at this level. This is 40,000 feet, not at the ground level.
So far, and I've got a few folks in line. I have for our first belief, the focus is on diversification, and we're gonna have because we are gonna have more conversations about these.
Mm-hmm.
The second belief, the focus is on efficiency. How we parse that out, the language. I mean, I assume everyone's taking notes on board members' comments, and that we'll be able to come back and kind of, as we listen to the feedback, we'll be able to tool the language to address some of the issues that are raised here. Tom?
Yeah. So I just had a comment on Dana's suggestion, and the thought struck me that we probably need, in addition to an introduction about what our legal authority is, sort of a preamble about what this is about. That we have beliefs that we apply as we try and earn the required rate of return.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that we really do have a belief that we can assure that we're going to do that. But we
sure
do,
strive to.
we do have a consensus about what we're trying to do.
There you go.
And,
Exactly.
and I think that would be that plus, the putting in the concept that we do this by delegation and take advice from the staff and its expertise, I think, are things to work into the beginning.
Tom, are you suggesting, because right now they've given us a draft of the preamble, are you thinking about integrating some of that into the preamble or adding something separate than that? Is that
Well, the preamble now is a legal framework.
right?
Yeah. So I don't know, maybe we need a preamble to the preamble.
That's what I was just going to joke about. Do we need a
But,
preamble?
we have some first principles that we have to establish. One is our
Right.
legal authority, another is what we're trying to do, the third is
Absolutely.
how we're trying to do
I
it.
agree.
And then
So legal and
these,
then,
with that as background, this is what we're trying to do.
got it. Great, thank you. All right, Lynn, you've been patiently waiting.
I wanted to go back to Paul's comment because I too like that alternative statement, but not for number 2, but for the first one. And this is a statement that says strong diversified investment management strategies and policies for the risk-adjusted rate of returns from a portfolio. And I like the mention of the management strategies because I think that's important as markets evolve and different boards have different concepts. It kind of opens up that idea that you can look at the different strategies like we did with the RMS.
So Lynn, are you maybe I'm suggesting it for you, but that second alternative under belief 2, the strong diversified investment management strategies and policies, blah, 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 that kind of really connects more with belief number 1, right?
Right, so that would be belief number 1. That would
Okay.
replace the shorter statement that we have now.
Okay. We can try that one on. Thank you, Lynn. Paul?
So, actually, a part of that I don't like is the reference to management strategies, because now we start getting into active versus passive. I mean, I think what Alan is saying is that number 1 is diversification helps. That's just a belief that we have. There's a lot of evidence that diversification improves the returns of a large portfolio. The second one is that there are efficient markets. And that doesn't mean all markets are efficient, but there are efficient markets. And whether we then go on to say, and we can actively manage for better returns in efficient markets or not, that's a separate question. But I think what we're trying to lay down here are these beliefs as opposed to strategies. I think that's the difference here. So their diversification helps to minimize risk and improve risk-adjusted returns. There are efficient markets. We can later debate, and it'll be, later on, number 4, perhaps, whether we can beat the market in efficient markets. And at that point, maybe we look at the evidence rather than, I mean, I think that's an issue where the evidence is overwhelming about whether you can beat the market in efficient markets. I don't think that's something we have to spend a lot of time talking about, but others on the committee might think we do. So.
So Paul was very pithy on number 1. Diversity helps. That's it. Done. Done. Written. Over. Just kidding. All right. Thanks, Paul. Tom.
Well, I had a comment on it, on what Paul was saying, and it may be helpful to move this along. I think the corollary to diversification, the diversification point, which I think we all agree with, is that as you diversify into different asset classes, different methods of managing the investment become appropriate. So you can't index private equity and expect to do well. You can public mature equities. So, I mean, I think that's the related point, is different methods of managing diverse asset classes are appropriate.
All right. Go ahead, Alan, and then we'll move on.
At the risk of tooting my horn, I think our recommendation for number 2 addresses both. It basically says that you can have active management, that it has the potential to add value. And the key here, once again, is that when it gets to implementation, it's not going to be in this document. It's going to be in a completely other process where you have your head of equity or your head of fixed income, your head of real estate or private markets up here and saying, here's how these beliefs interact with our real life portfolio. So I just think it's really important not to use this document to have those discussions, because we won't resolve them today.
Go ahead, Tom. Can you punch in there, Tom?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was punching in and
There you
I
go.
punched out.
You go.
So I guess there
You're
are
in.
different beliefs. One is a diversified portfolio improves risk-adjusted returns. 2, I mean, if we're doing it really in basic building blocks, 2, different methods of management are appropriate for different asset classes. 3, certain markets have efficient characteristics that imply one style of management that can be more passive and less expensive. I think the long-term benefits of managing investment costs, where appropriate, makes a lot of sense. There are some asset classes where you get what you pay for, it seems like, and we have to be cognizant of that.
Couldn't agree with you more. And once again, it's situational. And that is managing costs in an index fund. If you pay more than a basis point, you're a bad person.
Yeah.
Getting the best deal with a premier venture capital firm, for example, it may well be 2 and 20. It might be 2.5 and 20 or 30. And
3 and 35.
But I'm in the wrong business. But the key there, it is situational, and it's unique to the subcomponent of the portfolio. And I agree with you completely. But it's saying that some fees are something to really focus on. They're really important to the return in the portfolio. And then we apply it in its distinct way in each subcomponent of the portfolio.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that.
So we're keeping it big picture, and that really could be part of like belief 3, right? Managing costs. Okay.
Which, thank you for leading right into that.
Oh, sorry, I've got a couple more people in line before you go there. We can't quite get off the first 2 yet. That's all right.
Well, I think they bleed together.
Yeah. So I've got Joy.
Yeah, I had a question. So on number 1, I've lost track of if we've got agreement around which statement we're using. But one of the alternatives that have been offered references both diversification and long-term performance, whereas I think the others don't. And so I guess I just wanted to clarify: are we? I do think that that's one of the areas that we wanted to focus on as one of our beliefs. Whether we combine it with the concept of diversification or whether it stands alone. I think I just wanted to make sure we didn't lose
I
that.
think Dana nailed it. And in fact, risk-adjusted profile deals with risk and return, but we use jargon. And I think what we need to do is get rid of the jargon and then it does include return.
So we'll take care of it.
Danis, I was listening.
Thank you.
Sound good?
Sometimes
you.
I pop up with a thing
Thank
or
you,
two.
Alan. You nailed it. Harry.
A process question. The comments that Mr. Unterman just made in terms of some asset classes will require different approaches. When do we actually get into that discussion?
On a regular basis, you go through asset class strategies. So you recently had one on equity where you ended up with global equity. So we're not going to get the global equity until next year. But I don't know what asset class is up next. I don't know off the top of my head.
In terms of a debate about the strategy?
Right, where you do your management plan.
Well, I mean, we're going to have fixed income later today, but we're not going to talk about changing its underlying strategy. It's really going to be RMS and the global equity, implementing those, or we'll come back and at least keep a status report and probably debate what we're doing.
So when they come back with a strategy, implement global equity, we take a look at the long-term beliefs and say, how do they intersect? And have a legitimate debate on why not index everything. And someone has to make a case why, and I think that becomes evidentiary either, and you can make a compelling argument for it or you can't.
I think the point is that this exercise is not about implementation. It's really about
Right.
overarching beliefs, right?
It's a
And the
belief.
strategy and implementation part is what we have, kind of underneath, embedded in the committee agendas and discussions that we'll have. Great. Okay. Did I get everyone? You ready to move on to 3? Investment 3? All right.
So
Bullet
3 deals with costs, which we started to get into. PCA had proposed a very clean, very clean statement. There are long-term benefits of managing investment costs. We've talked about this in many different ways. There are lots of different ways to describe it, so just get your feedback. We all agree that it's important to manage costs. How do we say it properly?
I don't see any input on this one. I think that one seems pretty straightforward.
We're done. We'll come back to it. So, I didn't, we have not done this before, so I did not know how well we would move through the first 3, but number 2 was great. There's no set number. You've talked about fewer matter than more. If you remember, the matrix has generally 6 categories, but I think PCA in INV 18 has come up with 9, or 10, pardon me, 18, 19, and 20 has come up with 10 ideas. So there's no set number, so I'm just kind of numbering these beyond where we were. And you could debate them today. It would be helpful probably to give us some feedback. But I also want to know, we're not going to have as much time in July. We're going to have a short amount of time again in September. So we'd like to just focus in on maybe, if you like the idea, debating just one of these topics and really getting into it. Obviously, there's strong views about active-passive. I think I listed them out here. Yeah, governance, we probably all generally agree, but it's how do we describe it? ESG, I mean, we know that defining sustainability is a hard thing to do for us. And then PCA had brought up some of the other things to consider. So I'm going to come back to number 4. Would you like that in the July agenda to get into that? What are the topics you want, beliefs that you, are there, maybe I should say it better. Are there any beliefs that jump out that are like, okay, yeah, that we can all agree on that one. That's another one we can move on.
I think my only suggestion with 4, and then Tom's got some input, but I guess I'd like to reframe that, because to me we've had this, at least over the last 4.5 years I've been on the board, we've had very lively debates and exchanges about this, and to me, it kind of then sets it up for an either or, and to me, it seems like as a fund and as a board, we've agreed on a hybrid of those, right?
Right. No,
And
we do
so
active
to me,
and
I guess,
passive.
the way it's framed, even in the capital, it just, to me, it kind of, I'd love to reframe it.
Okay.
Maybe in the language Tom's talking about different strategies and for different asset classes. To me, and I don't know how to put that in a belief. So, but just reframing it so that it's more about Yeah, it's not either or, because I think even though we have disagreements on it, I think, again, this exercise is about what do we, 11 people on this dais with our staff and consultants kind of agree on, compromise on. So that's just thoughts on number 4. Alan, and then I'll get to Tom.
Our goal was to keep it as simple as humanly possible. I believe that number 2, talking about market efficiency, completely addresses this issue, and you can address all of these things at the asset class or strategy basis. You don't need a belief on this.
Because efficiency.
Because market efficiency or the lack thereof this is a function of that.
A fallout from it.
Okay. Tom.
I was going to say basically the same thing. I think once you say we believe in diversification, we believe in different we believe in different management styles for different asset classes, and we believe in efficiency. That some markets are efficient and others aren't, and that's how you adapt the style. You sort of covered this. And then we do have a policy that we examine every year about the extent of our active passive management.
Maybe our belief is that the asset management style should fit the market.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Paul?
Yeah,
Paul, you have thoughts about this?
No, I'm in agreement. I mean, obviously, inefficient markets can't be managed passively, so they have to be managed actively. But efficient markets, in my belief, should be passively managed, and I think there's overwhelming evidence that that's how you get the best returns. So I'm fine with that. I think to say, there are certain markets that are efficient and therefore by definition those are markets where a passive strategy works, because market efficiency by definition means you can't beat the market. That's what market efficiency basically means from an economic standpoint. So I'm fine with that. The issue that I have, and this is where we're going on to 5 and 6, is to say, so how do you then incorporate ESG? If you in inefficient markets, how does ESG matter? And my feeling is it actually doesn't from the standpoint of enhancing our returns. And I think that's a discussion we probably need to have, because while we may have a fair amount of agreement that where there are efficient markets, we're better off with passive investment strategies, what does that mean for ESG in efficient markets, I think, is a discussion that we need to have.
Thank you, Paul. So let me so are we basically saying we can scrap 4 because we feel like, what's that? Yeah. I just want to be clear, right? Okay. Because, I'm sorry, I'm just going with the board. Yeah. So just I realize we're having all these conversations and we're on INV 16. So kind of scratching 4 and saying that that's going to be addressed in 1 and 2. Yeah. Is everyone amenable to that? Okay. And then I've got Harry. Go ahead.
My question's about, it's on INV 16. I'm skipping 5 and 6 and going to internal management.
Oh, at the bottom. Okay, yeah. Got it.
We've embarked on bringing more assets in-house, and if there was a belief that passively managed in efficient markets, passive management is the way to go, and fees matter, costs matter. One could then conclude, do as much of that in-house as you possibly can. How do we get into a conversation around internal management?
We go to our belief 4.
In 4?
Yeah, I think it's implicit in what we've already covered.
Yeah.
And we do it explicitly. Internal management is a critical capability.
Thanks.
And we believe that, and we have complete confidence in that as a strategy for anyone of size.